the Assisted Introspections podcast with Shane Graham. Hey everybody, welcome back. This reflection here actually falls on an anniversary that I can't necessarily say that I'm celebrating today. This is an anniversary where a lot of lessons were learned and my life was actually changed kind of significantly. Rewind to February 4th, 1999. This is the memoir excerpt of Contact Alpha Golf, the collision of the USS Arthur W. Radford, hull number DD 968. February 4th, 1999, a day that had pretty much started like any other. At the time, I was on board the USS Arthur W. Radford, DD 968, and we were spinning through the chaos of pre-deployment workups, which was basically we were getting ready for our 6-month stint with the battle group that just loomed ahead. And of course, this meant checks, drills, evolutions, stack end to end. We did a weapons onload just a couple of days before. But this night that this evolution took place was a night that I'll never forget. This was what we call CSEF calibration, which is short for Shipboard Electronic Systems Evaluation Facility. Now, I know this sounds technical, and it was. What it basically meant was we were silently circling a buoy just off the coast of Virginia, letting a shore base station gather data on our radar signature from the shoreline. So it was radar minimalism. Only our surface radars were active, our AN SPS 55 and our AN SPA 25 Golf. Those were the only two radars that we really had active at the time. We were completely radio silent. No bridge-to-bridge radio, no other external comms outside of the minimum. Basically, in the simplest terms, we wanted to see what we looked like to them when we were quiet. So, from the deck of the ship, you could still see the shoreline. And there's something oddly comforting about that. Seeing land when you're underway, seeing those lights illuminated. Even if you can't touch it, it's still there. It's still solid. Yet, here we are, just out of reach of it. So, where I worked in CIC, or the Combat Information Center, at the time I was on a station called the DRT, or the Dead Reckoning Trace. And it's one of those beautiful analog holdovers in a digital world, even at that time. A big, giant lighted table, a sheet of paper, and your job is to basically mark where your ship is every few minutes alongside any surface contacts within 50 nautical miles. The person sitting there looking at the radar was seeing all the little blips on the radar that they were getting and calling off those coordinates to you, so you would mark it on this big sheet of paper on the DRT table. So you drew dots, you connected the lines, and it was kind of like a real-time Etch-a-Sketch or connect the dots of what's actually happening around you in relation to where your ship was moving. And not to mention, yes, it is a legal binding log. So I remember at the time, we had a house full of contacts on radar. Ships were coming and going, there were a few at anchor, some of them quietly passing offshore, and each one of them was marked as a skunk, or a surface contact unknown. We designated them Alpha through Zulu, or A through Z, and then doubling up when we needed. You know, you go from Alpha Alpha to Alpha Bravo to Alpha Charlie, all the way through, etc. And I remember this night, I was watching this one contact named Alpha Golf, AG, Alpha Golf. In relation to our ship, he was sitting off at about 010 degrees and somewhere around 15 miles out. 32,000 yards. Its movement was very minimal. He was just kind of a really tight dot pattern that said, I'm anchored and I'm staying that way. So I basically logged it as without much thought. Just another contact, just another part of the job. Well, about an hour before the collision, I was relieved from the DRT and I went to go and wake up the next watch team. I did the usual, went and shook my shipmates awake. I passed the snack machines, in the P-way on the way back to CIC, drop-kicked it, cursed the selection, even cursed more the fact that I didn't have any change to be able to buy anything, stepped outside for a smoke. I was basically just a sailor stretching out the final moments of downtime before I had to slide back into routine. So when I did return back into CIC, the mood was still calm. It was even loose almost. The oncoming team was starting to filter in, and all of a sudden, a fellow OS, or operations specialist, he tossed a pack of MoBoards at me and another watchstander. MoBoards, for those of you that don't know, are maneuvering boards. It's basically a analog calculator of sorts that we would use to manually calculate a contact's course and speed and their closest point of approach in relation to our own ship. Now, normally, these were great tools, but taking into consideration that night, our own ship was circling a buoy, and it was constantly changing speed and changing course. So I looked at this other fellow OS and I said, "Come on, man, this data's junk. You can't get a good CPA off a merry-go-round." But he pressed and he pressed. I finally just got sick of it, and I said, "Okay, what's his bearing and range in relation to our ship? What is his bearing and range?" I was going to try to get some sort of data just to placate this guy. And before anybody could answer is when we felt it. It was kind of a strange nudge at first, and not really anything to knock you off a balance. And actually, somebody even cracked a joke at that time, like, "Well, I guess we hit the buoy, huh?" And that's when the engines kicked. All back full. I'll never forget that sound as long as I live. Full back, hard reverse. That pitch of them was definitely unmistakable. Raw power suddenly yanked in the opposite direction, and it was right about that time that the newly standing DRT operator, the guy who had relieved me almost an hour before, he said it. "Brace for collision." We kind of hesitated and looked at each other like, "What? Did you seriously just say that?" And he repeated it again. "Brace for collision." And that's when we heard it. That unmistakable sound of the collision alarm. 3 distinct pulses that no sailor ever forgets. And for the very first time in my Navy career, that alarm wasn't just a part of the daily testing routine that they did every morning. This wasn't a system check. This was actually the real thing. So up until then, those 3 tones were just another checkbox to basically each morning. A noise that you basically kind of ignored over your morning coffee. But that night it was something completely different. Hearing it with adrenaline in your veins and steel twisting beneath your feet, it hit a lot differently. It hit a lot harder. The Saudi Riyadh, a merchant ship that we'd assumed that was safely at anchor, had plowed into our starboard side. Time slowed. CIC erupted. I mean, the ship listed violently to port under the impact. I remember grabbing the underside of the chart table with my knees bent and bracing myself as I'm sitting here watching chairs, logbooks, gear, sailors, everything else kind of flying, but it was all in slow motion almost. And then silence. That kind of eerie stillness that really only comes after chaos, and the one that makes you wonder if your ears have really stopped working or if the world itself just kind of needed a second to catch up. We sat and looked at each other, and we all shared that look of like, what the fuck just happened? But that moment really didn't last long. The general quarters alarm had sounded, and just like that, our training kicked in. We didn't think, we moved. Hours and hours, constant drills and repetition finally took over. Our damage control teams deployed, compartment checks, flooding reports, communication routes reestablished. We had basically responded as we'd practiced over and over again. The difference being that this time, it was actually real. This wasn't a drill. Now, miraculously, nobody was killed. The ship took some serious damage, but we ended up making it back to port on our own power. And to this day, I still remember that call sign Alpha Golf. I still remember that pattern of dots in my DRT. I still remember thinking at the time, he's not moving, he's fine, he's anchored. And then I remember learning the hard way that it's oftentimes the thing that you've accounted for and you've turned over to somebody else, that those are the times that actually hit hardest when that's really not the case. Thinking back on this, you can train for war, you can train for fire or for sinking, But nothing fully prepares you for that moment when the steel buckles beneath your feet and your ship gets struck by a contact that you thought that you understood and may have even taken for granted. It's one thing to track blips on a radar screen. It's another one to actually feel them crash into your reality. That night, Alpha Golf became more than just a contact. It became a memory, etched in not just a DRT chart, but in every one of us who lived it. And to tell you the truth, I haven't looked at a stationary contact the same way since, even 27 years later, when the anniversary still rolls around. And with that being said, I had another reflection that I had done as well that didn't really make as much sense, or it didn't really click until we had an instance like that. That's one of the most valuable and unexpected lessons that I took from my time in the Navy. And it didn't come from a manual or a mentor. The saying was, ship, shipmate, self. These were lessons in diversity, duty, and unexpected brotherhood. So, as I said, these valuable and unexpected lessons that I took from my time in the Navy, they didn't come from a manual or mentor. It actually came from experience, living this shit. It came from chaos, from the collision itself, both literal and metaphorical, but also of personalities, backgrounds, belief systems, all of them thrown together into the steel belly of a warship. To say that I served among an eclectic bunch is an understatement, and I really don't use that term lightly. All shapes, all colors, all sizes, all creeds, guys and girls from every corner of the country, and actually quite a few from outside of it. People like Nipo from Ukraine, whose dialect made conversations an occasional challenge, but his character eventually did the real talking. We had our share of playboys, we had our share of weirdos, we had geniuses, goofballs, myself included, and yes, the occasional individual who gave you the serious, watch your back kind of energy. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Some of these individuals that I served alongside with, I flat out did not like. There were folks that I would not piss on if they were on fire. And not being an asshole, but that's pretty much the truth. But here's the thing about it. None of that mattered. Because when General Quarters sounds, and it's not a drill, all of that personal belief, that shit gets buried faster than a bad eval in a burn bag. That same guy that you mentally had to brace for just to get through a meal on the mess decks, that could be the individual sealing the hatch behind you or pulling you out of a smoke-filled space. Or he could be the guy passing you the fire hose with shaking hands, but with locked-in eyes. That was when it really hit me. You don't necessarily have to like someone to be able to trust them with your life. I know it sounds insane, but it's true. Because in the Navy, respect isn't always based on friendship. Sometimes it's born out of necessity, out of shared training, out of knowing that when things do go sideways, this wildly different human being standing next to me is going to do their job, and they're going to do it well. And you're going to do yours. Well, because that's the deal. Ship, shipmate, self. We said it all the time, but actually having to live it was a totally different animal. It honestly taught me that real respect isn't about shared playlists or inside jokes. It's about character. It's about consistency. It's about watching someone show up day in and day out, even when you cannot stand their frickin' face. And at the same time, knowing that they've got your six. That lesson, that stuck with me. Now, here in the civilian world, I still encounter people that I don't click with all the time. People whose personality really grates against mine, like non-skid on bare skin. But I've learned to listen. I've learned to look past the cover, to pay attention to the content, because sometimes the story inside is actually worth the read. Not everyone is going to be your best friend. Not everyone is going to be your people. But everyone has got something to teach you. Even if It's just how to keep your composure in the tightest of quarters. And well, when the heat is on, you'll find out real quick who's got your back, regardless of whether or not they'd ever have your beer. So remember this: you don't always have to like someone to trust them with your life. Just trust that when the ship hits the fan, they'll do their damn job. That's not friendship. That's brotherhood forged under pressure. I'll see you next time. And don't forget, stay curious, stay honest, and stay in motion. This has been Assisted Introspections.